Hello, thank you for joining today's 5-minute Bible study in the book of Matthew. Today we're in chapter 8, and we're going to be looking at verses 18 through 27. So go ahead, open up your Bibles, read through those sections so you can follow along with us as we discuss this section. And in this section, I'm going to call True Disciples Follow Jesus No Matter What. And so what we see here is that Matthew begins the story by telling us that Jesus tells his disciples to go into the boat because we're going to cross the sea. We start with that, but after that, we're going to have a little bit of a section where Matthew segues to show us a point, and he comes back to show us what happens with the disciples getting into the boat. So here we are. The first thing we see, Jesus tells the disciples to go into the boat. So we assume they start heading over to the water. Then Jesus comes across two people. Matthew shows us two people. The first is called a scribe. Now, a scribe is somebody who knows the scriptures very well. Sometimes they're called lawyers because they know the law. Remember, the law in Jewish terms is from the scriptures. So they know the law, so they're lawyers, but they're scribes. They are experts at the scriptures. And so this one comes up to Jesus and he says the exact right thing. He says, "Let me follow you. I will follow you wherever you go." And he calls him teacher. In other words, I'm an expert in the law, but you can teach me more. I'm an expert in the scriptures, but you can teach me more. He recognizes that Jesus has knowledge way above himself. So he calls him teacher and he says, "I will follow you wherever you go." And Jesus responds to that very differently than we would. When we hear that, we'd be like, "All right, great. Come on in. Join the church. We'll make you members." But here, Jesus does something very different. He says, you need to count the cost. You need to understand what it means to follow me. So he poses him a situation. He says, did you understand that following me means that you don't even have a place to lay your head? In other words, all those creature comforts that you're used to, your home, your job, your family, everything that you're used to, you no longer will have this. And as he says this, we recognize that we never see the scribe ever again. Now, we don't know, maybe sometime in the future he comes back after the resurrection, he realizes his mistake and he comes into the church. We don't know, but in terms of this situation, Matthew wants us to understand that Jesus showed us what it doesn't look like to be a disciple. Somebody who says, Lord, somebody who says teacher, somebody who says, I will follow you wherever you go, but really doesn't want to do it on Jesus' terms, really wants to do it on his own terms. So that's a false disciple. The second false disciple we see is right after this, and this one is called disciple. He's actually called a disciple. So that tells us that we're going to recognize there are going to be such things as true disciples and false disciples. And in this case, this false disciple, he says, Lord. He calls him Lord. It should remind us of chapter 7 in verse 21, where people went up to Jesus at the judgment and says, Lord, Lord, didn't we do all these things? And Jesus says, I never knew you. And so this one says, Lord, first let me bury my father. And Jesus says, follow me. And that follow me is not a suggestion. It's not a recommendation. It's a command. In the Greek, it's actually an imperative. That's what they call it in the Greek. It's an imperative. And so it's a command. Follow me. And it has this urgency to it. Not later, not when you feel like it. Follow me now. And that's what Jesus basically says to him. And we see here a second kind of false disciple is someone who calls Jesus Lord, even may want to follow Jesus, but the things of the world come first. And in this case, he says, let me bury my father. Now, some people might think that, well, maybe his father's dead, he wants to bury. But that's not how it works in the Jewish ways. If you die in the Jewish times, you would have to bury your father now, immediately. We see that with Jesus in the resurrection. Jesus dies and he is buried that day. There's no 3-day, 4-day, 5-day period. It's that day you are buried. So if this man actually lost his father, they need to bury him that day. What's he doing walking around with Jesus? So we know that's not the situation. And it's not like today where we might have doctors that say, hey, you're going to die in a month or 6 months or whatever. They have no idea when they're going to die. So his father's living, and this man's looking for an excuse not to follow Jesus. He just doesn't want to do it now. He wants to do it on his time. And Jesus gives him that option, says, no, it's now or never. And so we never hear from that disciple again either. And then Matthew contrasts that with the true disciples. The true disciples follow Jesus. They go into the boat. Now remember, most of them are fishermen. They know the weather and they know a storm's coming and that they get in the boat anyway. They get in the boat anyway. And remember, Jesus just healed Peter's mother-in-law. So Peter's mother-in-law was ill, and Peter is going to leave his family, unlike this last guy who wouldn't leave his family. Peter's going to leave his family. He's going to get in the boat and go with Jesus. And so here they get in the boat. They know the storm's coming. They get in the boat with Jesus, and they go where Jesus tells them to go. And now a storm comes, and they're worried. And they're like, oh my, we're going to die. We're going to die. Jesus, wake up. We're going to die. And Jesus says, ye of little faith. And he calms the storms. But notice what happens. They followed Jesus even though they knew the storms. And when the storms came, they turned to Jesus and asked him for the help that they needed. And that's what Matthew wants to show us. That's what true discipleship looks like. Follows Jesus no matter what, no matter where, right now, not later, turning to him when things go bad. And so that's what it looks like. Finally, the last thing Matthew's showing us here is that Jesus, before, he was the God who was able to heal. Now he's the God who's in charge of nature. So Matthew's going to show us different aspects of the deity of Jesus. And this time he shows us that Jesus is the God over nature. And so that takes care of this little section. We're going to continue on next time. If you have any questions, thoughts, or comments, put them in the comment section below. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you so much for joining me today. Have a wonderful day, and God bless you.